Everyone, the September 20th meeting of the Charter Review Committee. Thank you for attending. We'll open the meeting, call the meeting to order at 3:01 p.m. Our first agenda item is a review of the September 13th minutes. Are there any changes or concerns with the September 13th minutes?
I have a couple of things I wanted to bring up. When I gave the report of the governance, we didn't, the term limits were not for the manager. The manager is an at-will employee. So it was for the select board. Okay.
That, I remember that. We discussed term limits for select board members.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's something that came up, I think you brought it up, Jackie, is when we amend the minutes, how do we know they're amended?
That will show up in next week's minutes.
Oh, it will, okay.
The minutes were amended and then adopted.
Oh, okay.
Great.
I think that was it.
Okay.
I also had a comment. Last week pertaining to the property subcommittee, I mentioned being interested in specifically inviting feedback from the BBC, DBA, and Chamber. Mm-hmm. But in the minutes it said that we hope or intend to meet with them. Okay. I'm not opposed to meeting with them, but I was just more referring to like a specific outreach to invite them to comment, hopefully through the comment link.
An openness as opposed to a plan.
Yeah, and I did the same on another subcommittee with a couple stakeholders, including ACT that works with youth, about youth voting, and ECDC pertaining to non-American, so that is the same thing I plan to do via email to them.
Okay.
I have just one other comment, and I don't know how important this is, but there's a typo in it. In the minutes.
Oh no!
I know. I can't stop looking at it.
I believe that.
I can't stop looking at it. It's
I didn't notice it.
Usually my secretary catches these things.
It's supposed to be a number 2, and it's the at symbol. So it has like number 1, wait for all the recommendations, and then vote on it, and then number 2, vote on So it was the at symbol instead of 2. I'm sorry, this is what I do for a living, and those things just stand up.
I was confused by that part, but I couldn't figure out what it was supposed to be.
Well, it's like 1 and 2.
That was such a miscellaneous thing to find right there.
Yeah,
that was.
That's how detailed I am.
I know, yeah. It's good though.
And that wouldn't show up as a typo.
Right.
I can't imagine what Rebecca's going to do to my power. Okay.
I think I'll have to resign my position as
town manager can stay at will, but there might be term limits for the note taker.
Yeah. I don't blame, please. Anytime, Jim.
Okay.
All right. Anything else for the minutes from September 13th? All right, do I hear a motion to accept the minutes as amended?
I'll make that.
Okay.
A second.
Okay. All in favor of accepting the minutes as amended?
Okay.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. The minutes are accepted. Our next agenda item is a public comment review. We have no new public comments for this week. We have some members of the public here. If anyone would like an opportunity to comment in person. Great. Anything else for public comment review? Good, moving right along. Okay, we have some committee reports. Let's dig into properties and housing a little bit here. I did receive from our subcommittees, from all of the subcommittees actually, which was great. They're one-pagers in various forms, so that's great. I've sent those all out to all of you. So that might be a good starting point for discussing potential charter changes related to properties. Does someone from the properties group want to kind of kick us off?
I'm going to start us off with it, and we'll all just jump in. So we met virtually with BCRC, Bennington Regional.
Bennington County Regional Commission.
Thank you. And Bill Colvin and Samantha Page. And almost everything we discussed, honestly, is not going to be anything that we put forward for a charter review. But it was a fascinating discussion. I think it was very informative, and they not only they had read the paper that we put out in relationship with Dan Monks and Paul Danzero also, and so they had built upon some ideas there. Bill brought up some, especially healthy housing, and it might not be a bad thing to bring back. But I did want to preface that. So this here update is going to be, quite frankly, just informational and stuff that we may want to present to the select board, then if they choose to take action on it on a town level, that might be something they want to do.
Is that something the committee agreed to? Has agreed to so far? The committee as a whole has agreed to?
No.
No, this is just our subcommittee so far.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Subcommittee.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that I get it right.
Yeah. So started off with talked about one of the first things that Bill actually brought up, and it's something that really resonated with Carolyn, something that she'd been thinking about, is that a lot of what we have right now is a stick approach when it comes to people with back taxes, properties that may be in disrepair, and how we can bring those up to code. And Director Colvin suggested that we need to start approaching some more of a carrot approach also. And Carolyn, if you can take us in a little bit more on the details of some of that.
Yeah, I think overall the conversation, we got a bunch of relevant reports from BCRC and the state that's disaggregated by county, and a lot of other good data that I need to look through more closely. I think you reviewed all of it, which is great already.
Yeah.
But the conversation generally just opened my eyes to the balance needed between stick and carrot, how both are important in any, governance, system, especially around, something like this. And so that complexity of what's a good stick, what's a good carrot, and then something that Bill said pretty clearly was also the need to recognize that there are properties out there where they're trying to find tenants, or they may be vacant, but there's still good intent and effort, in his view, by the property owner. And then there is also vacant properties left by people who just don't care, or there's that spectrum too. So that's just was a good reminder to keep in for me to keep in mind, I think. And I had talked in that mentioned in that meeting how I'm picturing maybe like a spectrum or these boxes where we can sort of categorize or outline the diversity of types of property, commercial and residential, the types of landlords that are either good ones or not ideal ones, and how the types of tools, being sticks and carrots, have to be sort of different and available across all of those types of situations.
Sure.
And part of that as addressing a carrot approach, he had mentioned that apparently right now we're basing our tax rate on square footage. No, I didn't think so.
Fair market value.
Okay, fair market value. So that would take in the condition of the property. Okay, great. So, because that's something he did bring up, and that's something we're already doing. Perfect.
It's something you guys already talked about.
Yeah.
How that incentivizes people not to do things to their property.
Yeah.
Right, because once the property's repaired and it's worth more, then the taxes go right up.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So maybe something to consider would be to explore what would be an incentive. Would there be a 0.5% lower tax rate for people who are keeping well-maintained property? I don't know. That would definitely not be a charter change. I don't believe it would be something to be done on the town level. But it'd be a nice carrot if I had a vacant home or a vacant commercial property. Yeah, I'll keep the yard mowed for a half percentage off.
I think he also alluded to how there's a lot of, and I took intro to economics, but like positive externalities to something like that, where it's like, you know, you don't want to be, or conversely, how, you know, negative properties can snowball into other people feeling like they want to neglect their properties, and the other side being, you know, if you're surrounded by other beautiful properties, there's sort of a social pressure, you know, interest in doing the same. So benefits beyond that particular property, it sort of could have a systemic effect potentially.
What considerations have you given to properties that have like some sort of historic or like cultural like value to the area? Like a lot of the properties up and down Main Street, like they're part of like the feel of like the downtown, and you know, like those buildings that have marble or old brick or whatever, that like if those things get damaged, they're really costly to repair. And so there's like that other incentive towards like not fixing it right, or like if you do fix it, then like kind of taking away from that sort of character of downtown.
Part of that, part of that would actually go back to grants, I believe. Having the town actively seek out grants. Unfortunately, a lot of the grants are tied to commercial / downtown business district properties. And there's not much that you could do for a residential property, grant-wise, of course. But he brought up one. They had they had found a grant to where they could match share for people who fix up their facades in the downtown business district.
Okay.
And so there are different things like that. Of course, the one problem, of course, with historical significant buildings, especially if they're on the registry, is you're really tied with how you're going to rehab a property, and you can get spendy and spendy fast. I admit it, I led this right to this conversation here about the role that Bennington could play in attracting first responders to town and retaining them here. And it's and bringing up when we talked with Dan and Paul, you know, Dan made the correct, you know, the logical and correct assumption. The town of Bennington does not want to be in the business of being a landlord. But just off the top of his head, Mr. Colvin suggested that, you know, and this would be something that would be a heartburn for the select board, which I like even more with a select board member here, that maybe the town of Bennington could offer some kind of incentive program for either current police officers who are here but live out of town, or new police officers coming aboard to assist with down payment to purchase a property in Bennington. And the logical part of that is if a police officer buys a home in Bennington, the chances are they're going to stay here for a significant amount of time. Even if they plan on reselling and moving on down the road, they're going to stay long enough to put some equity into that property. So I think one way or the other, the town of Bennington, there are two advantages. We have a long-term, better trained police force. We're able to attract right now, and what as Paul always says, the problem is the promotion of getting people here, because every community in Vermont is trying to get that same pool of police officers. So it's just something else that maybe we can consider there.
And that was an idea that came from you based on an example of a previous partnership that the hospital had with some banks and real estate.
Yeah, it was a healthy homes initiative.
So that,
yes.
the healthy homes precedent inspired your thought there. And I think that also still fell in the categories, okay, we couldn't probably write all of that into the charter, but this is a creative sort of, you know, idea.
Let me ask, were there charter changes that you've actually considered and thought like this isn't probably going to be viable? Or have you not considered any charter changes?
For our last meetings, we haven't. What were the ones that we were looking at? I'm sorry.
There is a document
Yeah.
where one of them, and we skipped it because, we skipped it in our BCRC conversation because he was like, it was all covered. Like, I don't know, he had nothing more to add pertaining to liens.
Yeah.
I honestly feel like we're still learning a lot because so much of it would actually fall in the charter is tied by the state. And we actually have a meeting Monday morning with Seth Bongartz on the topic, so that'll be good. But unlike maybe some other committees, I don't think we're in a place yet. But surely I think it'll consider sticks and carrots and types of landlords and properties.
We are on track, but we're honestly being pretty deliberate.
Yeah.
Putting a lot of work into this, but we're also trying to be focused in on where we go. Like, say, this was a little bit of a sidetrack, but I thought it was one that was it was a good investment of 1 hour Zoom. That's for sure.
To answer your question, I think a lot of what we're finding out is what is actually going to be viable as a charter change versus the state.
Yeah.
And until that question is perhaps better answered on Monday, I don't think we can really give you that answer.
Sure. Okay. You also mentioned that you got some data from the state, some other notes, I guess, that came out of your meeting with BCRC.
Yeah. Back
Can
in
you
2000,
provide those to me? I'll send them to the full committee. Right?
Sure.
it was their Energizer report from back in 2020, talking about livability and housing needs in Bennington. It's I think what 72 pages, but it's actually a pretty interesting read. It was about a cup of coffee and a half.
Sure.
You know,
Okay.
so not bad. You know.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I think especially as we start thinking towards the final report, which I know it might feel really early to start thinking about that, but we're about a third through
Well, yeah.
the time that we have together to do this, and so.
And we did get permission to use all the links, all the reports that he shared with us.
Okay, yeah, so like having those sources in the final report so we can point to those, any changes that have, any charter changes that have surfaced in your group, whether you feel like they're going to be appropriate changes or not, like they should come here for discussion, even
Right.
if they come here and you say, we really think that this is like a no-go, but like we should discuss that here.
Mm-hmm. And that pretty much, I don't have really anything to add to it. Michael, Carolyn? But like I say, I personally believe that after we do speak with Seth on Monday, and I was so anxious for it that I was actually there at the community market this morning. But I think that's going to give us a better idea of, with a lot of these, when we do, okay, then how are we going to craft this so it can come from the select board and then be suitable for a legislative fix.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do know that when we craft our charter change suggestions, that the language has to be multi-purpose, so to speak,
Sure.
not only for the select board and the town, but to kick up the chain. And I think Mr. Mongartz can be quite helpful with that.
Yeah.
And you said you have another meeting lined up for us
Yes.
next week.
Yep.
You would mention. So that's
With who?
We had talked before about getting perhaps a realtor's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
So,
okay, yeah.
so that's also in the
so
works.
that should happen next week, and then we can get, perhaps some answers to what is it like trying to flip these homes that have gone without care. How difficult is it from a leasing perspective with landlords, being a landlord?
liens.
So we'll get maybe a perspective that's outside of just the regular homeowner or regular business owner.
Okay.
And again, I know personally myself, and I haven't discussed this with the subcommittee. I know that it's been mentioned and that maybe we talk with lending institutions, but my bias from previous conversations that we've had with the town, a lot of times the lending, especially when it comes to liens, the lending institutions are part of the problem because they can hold a property on the books for pretty much as long as they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter to them. So I don't know how valuable that would be And I'm more than happy to still pursue it if you all want us to, but like you say, we are getting kind of down to where we need to shape this up.
Yeah. Others that, for properties, thoughts,
No, I'd
valuable
like-
changes?
No, I look forward to getting the document to read.
Yeah, it was a good read. I remember the report when it came out, and it was all about rehabbing the Energizer building, and it was an interesting read then. And it had some, and even though some of the housing needs data is from 2020, it's not going to be that outdated, to be honest. So yeah, I think it'd be valuable.
Okay.
And I think that ties us up, unless you guys have anything else you want to add, or if there's any other questions.
Not to belabor the point, and not that I'm suggesting that you come up with a charter change that is unrealistic just to put into the report, but in thinking about the report and how that's going to be perceived, I would rather see a charter change that was considered and that we're not recommending action on than to see committee recommends no changes, right?
Yeah, we don't even have bad ideas though yet for charter changes.
Yeah. I think just as a general note for the whole committee, for all of the research that we're putting together, and these ideas surface that maybe worked in another community, but we just don't think it makes sense here. Like, we should highlight those.
All right.
I have one point to make too, and I don't know if this is exactly the right time, but why not? I'm going to be using these one-pagers in making the PowerPoint for the presentations. Obviously, you have a lot of meetings and more information coming up, it sounds like, in the next week or so. If you come across something that you think is significant that you want in your presentation, be sure to pass that along to us, even if it's just like a bullet point that you would want included from new information that you've learned or anything, so we can incorporate that. Because next Friday, we're hoping to have like a draft of that. Right. So. Fair enough.
Okay.
And that's for everybody, actually. So.
Great. Yeah. Absolutely. We will talk about voting, but maybe we'll stick admin in the middle here briefly, if everyone's all right with that. Yeah. And chat about the report, the presentation we're putting together. Also the press release that is included here for the public forum. And just one of the things that came up in our admin meeting this past week was just some clarification that these subcommittees it might be helpful to think of them as a research group as opposed to like an autonomous subcommittee, right? Where we've split up so that we can do a lot of this learning on these topics in a short period of time, so that we're not all trying to fit those into these meetings, right? But the findings that come out of that research should all come back here so that we can all review that research, right? And then we'll discuss and deliberate on that here. So your subcommittees are not deliberative bodies, right? There should be no rejecting of ideas. There should just be stating findings about those potential changes and pros and cons, but all of that information should then come here for discussion. Does that make sense? Along those lines, I think in the PowerPoint that we're putting together, I think it would be helpful for each of the groups to have some of the same subset of information, including which stakeholders you've met with, how many, sources of information like this report, data that you've dug up, your findings about potential changes, So I would love, I think the one-pagers that we've received so far are a great starting point, but I would love to see the committees sort of add some of that information into their one-pagers and get that back to me by Wednesday.
It's going to be more than a one-page.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Just so you know.
Other things for admin? The press release?
The press release, and just to mention, so we met with Jonah and talked about more than just a press release, just so everybody knows. We're going to be creating like the business cards with a QR code that'll be easy to pass out, which I think we all talked about a little bit before. Some posters and flyers, social media, in addition to the press release. So, great. I think that was the other thing.
Great. Has everyone had a chance to look at the press release that we sent out? Are there any notes on that? Any concerns about sending this out as is here? Any information that you think isn't here that should be?
My concern is I was not aware. Did you make arrangements with Cat T to air it live?
That was actually a note that I had here as well.
Okay.
I have not. I actually don't know who made arrangements with Cat TV at all. Stu, is that part of the liaison role?
No,
Okay.
but Cat TV has indicated an interest in covering this. It may not be live because they have, their evening meetings are pretty full during the week because they're covering all the select boards and other groups during the meeting. So this may not be live, but it will certainly be recorded and played back.
Okay. So we can just strike aired live.
Oh, that's great right then. Yeah.
Any other changes to this press release?
Did you maybe put a title press release on it?
Should it say press release at the top?
Yeah, in big letters, press release.
Well, I assume Jonah will do that.
Okay,
it doesn't
Jonah
also-
will do that.
Yeah.
Jonah will do that, all right.
I feel like he
Jonah's
also put
The town logo.
town logo and all that stuff on there too.
It doesn't,
It's just-
to me, it doesn't jump off the page as a press release, the way it's written. Very nicely done, but.
Along those lines, I wonder if Jonah is the right person to put as a media contact, or if I should be listed.
That's an interesting question.
Normally, can I speak as somebody who does this?
Yes.
Okay. Normally, you would have a communications person be that, and the media would, because you're quoted in the release, they would ask him to set up time with you. I mean, that's a weird way to do it, but that's how they normally do it.
Okay. In like corporations and stuff, or I just like, does that generally work different in like a municipal context?
No, Joan is our communications coordinator, so we direct all communications with the town through him.
Okay.
Now, people go to the select board individually, they go to me individually, they go to Dan individually if they know that we're the person they want to talk to, but generally, all broad comments come to Jonah. So you could use him as the
I'm happy to let him coordinate communications.
No, to Rebecca's point, that's what the hospital does.
Yeah.
As well. Everything goes through like that.
All right. Thank you to the Berkshire Family YMCA for providing childcare. That's excellent. Anything else on the press release? Great. Should we vote on this, or
I think you need
it
to.
seems like we have consensus?
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions about what we've discussed for the admin group? No, okay. We will return to our regularly scheduled programming.
Can I write that down?
We'll open it up for the voting subcommittee. We have a one-pager here that we've drafted, including current requirements. Some brief background on the process the committee's taken, different areas that we've looked at and considered, and some notable findings, some things that have come up in our research and our conversations that I think are pretty relevant to whether we will recommend these charges or not. How are people feeling about these voting changes? Let's start maybe with the lowering the voting age to 16. Talk about that piece specifically.
Did you want me to talk about it, or are you asking all of us individually?
I'm opening it up.
Okay, I'll let everybody else, and then I guess we as a committee can fill everybody in. After
Sure.
that.
I mean, I'll start.
Great.
If nobody else wants to. I am leaning towards it. Like, I mean, from what I've heard and from some of the input that we've received, feel like it could be a positive thing for the town. I mean, I know that we don't have a lot of voter turnout. That's a problem that many towns have, and if this is a way to help create lifelong voters, I feel like that's a positive outcome for this, and to engage youth, I think is great to do, just for them to be thinking about, if this is a way to really get them to be thinking about their own community and being part of it. I think that's a positive. I know that there's more information to be gathered, and I'm not 100% stuck on that, but that's definitely the side I'm leaning on.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you, Rebecca. I just think that it may have been another meeting that it came up is, what is that population if we opened it up? What are we talking about? 1,000 people, or I don't know. I don't have a feel for that. I don't know if it's information we can get, but it would be interesting to know, how many we're really talking about.
We can try to get that for you.
Yeah.
I would appreciate that.
And to that point, one of the groups that we did reach out to was Brattleboro, and they had, correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, 20 registered 17-year-olds, and none of them voted.
I thought it was 40 registered.
Was it 40?
20 voted.
I don't remember that. I could be wrong.
We can double check.
We'll double check
yeah.
on that.
I will say that
you're right. It was of the 17-year-olds who were eligible here in Bennington, they did not vote in the presidential primary. That's what I was saying.
Oh,
From Cassie's
conversation.
right. So to clarify, in the presidential primary, you're allowed to vote if you're going to be 18
At the
by
time
the
of the
general
Okay.
election.
All right.
Right? And so that's one place where someone who's 17 is already allowed to vote. And so in Bennington this past cycle, it was 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, we had no minors, no 17-year-olds vote in that primary.
But in Brattleboro, right? I think you were, yeah.
Yep.
But in Brattleboro, where they did lower the voting age, there were a few dozen registered to vote, and indeed the turnout for them was disproportionately higher than the rest of the population.
Well,
right?
how would somebody even know that? Maybe that
What do you mean?
message has to come
Know
out,
what?
that I can vote at 17 if I'm going to be 8.
As long as you're 18, that is the standard for federal elections.
They're just supposed to know. I think,
Okay.
and that's another piece of the like complexity is the awareness, the public understanding and perception of, do I bring an ID? All the same day. You asked some clarifying questions.
Yeah, and that
about
was
what's up
one
with
thing that we'll have to
same
get
day.
into here is, how do you verify a 17-year-old on same day voting? Should there be a process prior to that? Like, does same day voting apply to a 16 and 17-year-old? So there was just a lot that we'll get into after, I guess we go round table in.
When I registered to vote, you had to be 21.
Well, right, and so I think there's a history actually of lowering the voting age in this country from having to be a landowner to having to be a man to having to be 21 to 18 to and so it's not without precedent changing some of those guidelines on who has access to the polls. I think one of the things that stands out for me, and maybe a little pushback against some of what I'm hearing about how many people are going to show up, is it going to matter, is it going to actually affect the election, is that I think potentially that's a bit of a distraction from the core issue of should 17-year-olds be eligible to vote. And I think that is a question that we can consider regardless of whether they're going to, regardless of how it's going to affect the outcome of the election. I think at the heart, the question is, should they have access to vote?
I guess one question I would have, would this also pertain to school board elections, or would this just be municipal elections?
Yeah, so one of the things that came up when talking to Cassie was that, and we've seen this with other towns, is a byproduct of allowing different groups to vote, is that by allowing them the option to vote, by law, they're actually allowed to hold office. So that is another consideration when we're talking about non-citizen voting, when we're talking about underage voting, is that the byproduct of it could be that they are allowed to hold office. And then what are the regulations behind what offices can they have? I think Brattleboro, correct, there was only a certain amount, certain offices they could hold.
My recollection is that the state legislature said any race that someone is allowed to vote in, they're allowed to run for. Now, I think that's a little different from the question you asked, which was, would they be allowed to vote in school races? And one of the things we found in talking to Brattleboro was, originally in Brattleboro, they were allowed to vote in school races because the Brattleboro School District was Brattleboro. Then Brattleboro School District merged with some others, and the boundaries of that school district exceeded the boundaries of where youth voting was allowed.
Okay.
And so the youth were then no longer allowed to vote in the school election.
Wow.
A follow-on effect to this then was that Brattleboro had to start printing separate ballots for the school election and for the town elections so that they could give the appropriate people the appropriate ballots.
Now, the cost of the ballots was one thing we talked about with Cassie, and there is an additional cost to doing that. In my opinion, it's not a substantial enough cost, being ballparked from the numbers I heard, that would be the main driver behind saying no.
Okay.
I think it was about $1,700. Yeah.
I also don't believe that we should allow cost within reason to be the reason why we limit voter access, just as a general rule.
I have a question. In Brattleboro, is it 17-year-olds or 16 and 17-year-olds?
16 and 17.
Okay.
And to that point, I guess where I currently stand on the issue is that 17, as I mentioned in the last meeting that we had, with parental consent, you can serve in the military. There's already 17-year-olds who are voting in presidential primaries. For me, 17, I'm going to stick with what Stu kind of alluded to, which was the amendment back in the Vietnam era, where it was you're old enough to fight, you're old enough to vote. That's good enough for me. I firmly believe that. I also believe that if you're old enough to fight, you're old enough to drink a beer, but that's a different conversation.
That's on the chart, yeah.
maybe on the next charter run. Now everybody knows where I stand.
Lower the drinking age.
But for me, the 17 is it's a given for me at this point, unless I see some sort of data or information that completely changes my mind. The 16-year-olds, one of the things that was mentioned that I think less applies to a 17-year-old because they can serve in the military is the fact that minors can't actually swear oaths. So one of the things that you're required to do currently as a voter here in Vermont, you have to be a citizen of the United States, a resident of Vermont, you have to have taken the voter's oath, and you have to be at least 18 years of age. So there's obviously a couple issues there with the current town voting requirements that may be a legal component to it that perhaps does not apply to a 17-year-old that you can argue can serve in the military with parental consent. So I still want to explore that a little bit.
Can I share another just like impression from our meeting with Cassie on Tuesday? Tuesday. Was that she has a really hard job. And again, with like boxes and think of all these things, like, there's sort of like ethical, philosophical questions about like who should vote and, whatever. And then there's legal, of course, and state and federal and everything. And then I feel like there's like the logistical, operational that includes cost and a lot of what Cassie does. And it was just really interesting to hear about how complicated and how much work and how much hand-based work she has to do in order to reconcile different systems, and things are out of date, social security cards, all these different things. And I think there's improvements coming in terms of like IT and ballot things coming from the Secretary of State, and that was confirmed. I had a call with the Winooski town clerk. But it is really hard, and changes will be really, really hard. And so again, I don't think that or cost or anything should keep us from the answer, but it was just like, whoa. I don't know, I have an appreciation and awareness of like how a change like this could have implications for other things too. So
yeah, the people who oversee our elections in general, they should be commended. I mean, it's a very difficult process that's made obviously more difficult under current circumstances. So, that is a consideration, but not the ultimate detractor to any decision that us as a subcommittee would make in terms of recommendation. And
I was really amazed at how hard and complicated it is. But we asked a bunch of questions about sort of election integrity and everything, because that's such a hot topic. And I was really reassured by what she ultimately said about how people just basically don't commit voter fraud intentionally from, in general. So that was nice to hear.
Couple things that come up for me with the discussion so far. Along the lines of old enough to fight, old enough to vote, right? You go back maybe even a little further and you have that cry of no taxation without representation, right? So 16-year-olds are taxed if they work, right? They are allowed to legally work. So I think there's a similar argument to be made there for 16-year-olds. Along the lines of youth sort of swearing a vote and stuff, I think one of the pieces that I remember hearing from a public comment actually at a previous meeting was the state changing the age of sort of legal majority for some crimes. I'm not entirely clear on the details, but
there are actually two directions the legislature is heading in. One is to lower the age for crimes involving weapons and drugs.
Okay.
currently, you can be considered a juvenile, I think, at the age of 21, 16 to 21. You can be considered last, but most of those crimes fall as juvenile crimes.
Okay.
They're looking to lower that age to 17 or 18, I can't remember which. But there's also a move afoot to increase the age for certain other situations. For instance, you can stay on your parents' health care until you're now 26.
Okay.
And so they're looking at other laws where they would increase the age to provide more protections for individuals who are younger.
Okay. So it sounds
they're
like there's
moving in
some
two directions.
considerable nuance there.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the pieces that came up for me when we talked to Cassie was that currently voter verification happens through the state system, right? The process of validating that someone is a citizen, that they're of age, that they live in this community, that happens through the state system, which currently doesn't accommodate youth voters or non-citizen voters. So in addition to having to track their voter registration sort of in a separate system, then the onus would be on the town to verify their eligibility. This is where some of the issues come up around, do we allow, if we recommend the change, should it allow sort of same-day registration at the polls, or should the youth have to show up ahead of time to the town office with a state-issued ID, something along that lines? Because I think that's the only way that the town can actually validate that they're eligible to vote in these elections. And then to the point of fraud, as much as it doesn't happen, I think probably a big piece of why it doesn't happen is because the consequences for committing voter fraud are so severe and strict. It's an open question for me whether those consequences would apply to a youth voter, right? I don't know if any of that really sways me to the point that I wouldn't support this, but just, again, my role on this group is to bring the information back here, and so there it is.
I do have one question regarding the charge. The charge is to lower 16 and older. Does that necessarily mean that the recommendation of this committee can't be that 17 and older is the recommendation? Or are we, I don't want to say stuck, but are we mandated, I guess is the word, to include 16?
Yeah, I think of this committee kind of as a constitutional convention, if you will, that they've opened the door. We can recommend anything we want, including none of what they've suggested.
Right.
It could be 17 and 2 months.
That's
Right?
great.
We could,
That's
like,
good.
right, we can do whatever.
Well, that's an idea I think that came up to be like, if we match what's allowed in the presidential primary, then maybe that means you have to print less ballots in one of those elections. And, yeah.
We haven't talked too much about non-citizen. Do we still?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues are largely the same, but sure, if you want to speak to that, let's open that up.
Well, I guess, for people's awareness, there's a lot more precedent in Vermont for non-citizen voting, and I had a great call yesterday with the Winooski town clerk, and I shared those notes just, I think, yesterday afternoon, so we can get them in the next pager. But there, first of all, they call it all resident voting. They don't define it as non-citizen, which I thought was a really interesting difference, and I liked that. And I wish I had all the notes in front of me, but so it was Winooski, Montpelier, and Burlington that currently have that, and it came from a taxation without representation type motivation from the voters in Winooski in 2020 as a result of a charter review committee in 2019. It got vetoed by the governor in 2021, and then the legislature overrode the governor. Jenny also said that they're early on, so I assume it was 2021, maybe 2022, there were a couple of lawsuits from the Vermont GOP about those amendments, and those were all dismissed. So I thought that was really interesting. She also, their ballots are translated into 14 languages. They have interpreters present at the polls, and it, again, in terms of non-citizen, it's like, does that mean green card? Does that mean prior to green card? Does that mean anybody? Regardless of documentation status, so that's something we should think through. But I am at least very familiar with the refugee community, and like every person that comes in is resettled as a refugee has a social security card, has a, is immediately eligible for employment. And so to me that social security card is like an important, thing in my mind. And I would say personally, I'm still open-minded on both sides of the charge. I haven't completely made up my mind. I think I'm in favor of lowering the voting age. I think I'm more in favor of non-citizen voting is how I currently stand. But based on more precedent, based on individuals having social security cards, working, military service, similar themes, honestly, to the 17-year-old argument. But yeah, it was really interesting. And we hope to talk to the Montpelier town clerk, and also basically the mentor or the leading municipality on all of these issues is Tacoma Park, Maryland, and hope to connect with them too. Because Jenny said that they sort of held Winooski's hand through the were really helpful to them. So we'll obviously try to see if they could have a chat with us in the next week.
So just because I want to make sure I heard it correctly, because I'm thinking I'm still of two minds on that issue. I can definitely fall in line in favor of somebody who is documented, having, but not full U.S. citizen yet. I could definitely see a case and a moral argument to allowing them to vote.
Me too.
I would worry about if we were to go to a non-documented status, to where that could open up some doors that would be contentious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
think one of the interesting things that I saw in the notes from the meeting with Winooski was that they have, I think it's 600 to 1,000 undocumented immigrants in their community, and generally they don't register because they don't want their name appearing on the ballot, right? They want to stay undocumented.
Well, they want to. They don't. Yeah.
Or they want to avoid being listed on a voter roll.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So.
I guess my suggestion to throw out there, it might make very clear that we would be, if we are, that we'd be looking at documented, to just take away that whole argument that voter fraud,
Yeah.
I honestly, I feel crappy for even suggesting that, but it's a concern,
No, I appreciate that.
In Winooski, what do they need to do to register to vote? Do they need any documentation, or what do they?
She referenced names and birthdays. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
Maybe my notes said, or I could go back and ask. But
Just be interesting.
Yeah. And again, it would be the similar kind of situation with youth voters where there's no verification process that happens through the state because they don't there's not the ability to put them into the state election management system. So we would be on our own to sort of figure out how to verify their eligibility.
Although she did, I'm pretty sure, allude to this new system that is more advanced, more flexible, and she was very optimistic overall and positive.
Is there any expected date when that would be rolled out? Like sometimes these things can take years and years.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
Right.
This new system would be a statewide system that would allow for this. Is that what you're
It's
saying?
all
Okay.
the Secretary
Update,
of State
Okay,
like
gotcha.
is in charge of all of that. And to something you raised, all residents are also eligible to run for any of these positions
Awesome.
too.
Yeah.
So, but I think you and I are on the same page, and it's just complicated. It's just like so much new
Yeah.
information. It's hard. I really can't say where I've landed at all, but my initial reactions.
My next door neighbors they would be lined up first ones at the poll if they were allowed to vote. They're refugees, you know. Yeah, and they want to be American,
Right.
and they're in line, they're waiting, you know.
Yep, and they have social security cards.
They're working.
And
Well, and
that's
there's
cool.
two major points at play here, right? One is the freedom to vote, which is something that this country can stand on, opposed to other forms of government. And then the other component is improving an immigration system, which has been, obsolete for probably the last 3 decades.
Yeah.
So those are two major conversations. Certainly a charter change like this would be easier to do if there had been any major overhaul of the immigration system over the last 3 decades. There would be more guidance, there would be more clarity. I know the majority of people probably want the same type of registration process for an American or just every voter, period. It's not one system for this person and another system for this person. Yeah. It should be, as simple as you are able to provide this form of identification and, but that's just not the world we live in. And there are considerations to, again, the impact of a change like this. Is it a reasonable question to ask? To your point, I think, is there a concern if non-citizens at all levels would not only be able to vote, but also be able to hold office? I think that's a reasonable concern for anybody, regardless anywhere. That's just my personal opinion. I know that's going to be a concern that would be brought up to any, recommendation for this committee or topic for the committee. As we found out, just from a town side, but also from, you can look on social media, you can talk to your neighbor. This is a very dynamic situation to address, and it's complicated further by the processes in place for the towns, the processes in place for the state, the disconnect between the town and the state, what we would potentially be left to do, as Jackie pointed out, where we're not only the people that are handling the process, but we're also the oversight. That's a lot to put on a town clerk.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of considerations.
Well, I've listened to what everybody's input has been. I originally was dead set against the 16-year-old, 17-year-olds voting, and then when I heard all of the arguments and the public comments, I kind of changed my mind on that. I think it's probably a good thing from my standpoint, but I would never support non-citizens voting because it would open the door to other things. And I think that until, to your point, Michael, that this immigration system is improved, I couldn't support that. I would think that it would be corrupted very quickly.
I think as things stand to that point, the potential for that, I think, is greater than it should be.
Yes.
I would say the exploitation of perhaps the limitations of a town government system, being tasked with the oversight and the process. I do think that the potential, not that it would strain necessarily Bennington or Winooski. I think it's a fair question to ask. But I don't, one of the things that came up was the precedent, and then over time, what does that look like? That was kind of something that had been mentioned of, is there enough data to drive this kind of charter change? I don't know that we have that answer. I know that I had mentioned in the last meeting we as a committee shouldn't be afraid to lead from the front, and I still stand by that. But I think it's, there's just a lot.
Well, maybe it'd be interesting to ask Cassie. My perspective from our conversation with Cassie was that lowering the voting age would be more of an administrative burden on her role than expanding to non-American voters. And then I guess I just don't share or see where the concern is from in terms of like exploitation or like the other things.
I think, well, like the example would be same-day voting for non-citizen. What does that look like? What documentation do they need to provide? How does the town of Bennington verify that? Because that verification was one of the... I think it'd be the same as any
other resident.
Would it? I don't know.
Because I'm not advocating for undocumented individuals to be eligible.
Sure,
I'm arguing for the folks that have socials and driver's permits and get leases, have leases with landlords and.
Well, and I think that might be something that we define too as non-citizen.
Right.
Are we going to include like is that
card holders or
correct? I mean, and I think that's part of what perhaps the subcommittee has to do is this is what we're defining.
I agree.
All right, well, I'm being mindful of the time. I think it would be good to get clarification from Cassie on that because I don't think I got the same sense that one population would be more difficult to sort of fold into this than a different one. So I would love to hear about that. Quickly, before we move on, are there other questions that people feel like they would need answers to continue thinking about this, to be ready to vote on these voting issues?
I have one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the when you talk to, if you do talk to folks in Maryland, was it? Maybe you already know this. If you found out how long, because they've been doing this for longer, right? They've
the 1990s.
Oh, for a very long time. Okay. So it'd be really great to get their perspective on the success of it and any struggles or anything that they've had along the way. I would love to hear what those might be.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine it is well documented.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to your concern, non-citizen voting has more of a precedence and experience and data in the U.S. than lowering the voting age below 18, for what that's worth.
Okay.
But we do want to. I do want to talk to, because there's three other. We've only talked to Winooski, and then Brattleboro's experience is like very unique because they're weird. That's a big thing, and that's like very apparent in this research. But yeah, Bennington or Burlington and Montpelier might have insights too.
Well, in that meeting with Brattleboro that we sat in there wasn't a. I don't mean this in a negative way. There wasn't a lot of depth to that topic. It was more of like this is where they're at in the process kind of thing because it was their committee meeting. So it wasn't a round table discussion focused solely on this specific issue.
Brattleboro had already approved youth voting, and they were discussing adding non-citizen voting. All right, other questions that people feel like they need answers to on this topic? Great. We'll move on then. This is great discussion, I think. We'll move on to, let's go to governance. Governance is not slated for an in-depth discussion today, so maybe you can give us a brief update on research that you've pulled up in the past week, and maybe anything that's not included in your one-pager that would be helpful to add vis-a-vis sort of what we discussed, findings, stakeholders.
Well, we're going to meet with Stu next week. That was kind of the last person that we were going to meet with.
Okay.
Before we made some recommendations. We still have the 3 points of the governance committee, which is coming up with a contract for the town manager. We don't know the term. We're just throwing out the concept right now. We haven't decided that. Term limits for the select board. We haven't decided what the term we were looking at. We know it's more than one.
Sure.
And also the when the town manager position became vacant, to have a nationwide search.
Great.
Other topics that discussed this week were responding to the public comments, coming up with a formal response.
Great. Any questions for governance folks?
So you mentioned the nationwide search. How, have you guys proposed how that would even happen, or like what's the structure to make that happen?
Not there yet.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Anything else for governance? No. Great. I think our CPARB group would speak on for a minute or two. I'm happy to start here. So we have a meeting scheduled for next week with members of the Bennington Police Department, with Chief Doucette and Lieutenant Grandy. So we look forward to having a productive conversation with them. You'll know we did meet previously with several members from the CPARB board themselves. And we had a really generative discussion there, I thought. I will say that I have felt that there's a lot of resistance that's come up around this topic from the community. Just the community at large, I think. I think there's a lot of sentiment that there should be no consideration of any mention of CPARB in the charter. Just kind of a full stop. I don't want to consider this at all. That might be the outcome of this group, right? But my understanding of our charge is to investigate whether any charter changes would be appropriate, which involves investigating the charter changes that could be considered, right? And so to that end, the ones that I know have sort of come up in discussions with the CPARB group, and just other constituents in the town, or some sort of disciplinary power that they could hold over the police department. This is something that's been done in other jurisdictions and other municipalities, usually by like a review board that includes some carefully chosen members, right, that have sort of experience with law enforcement and their policies and procedures, which is not something that this current board has, right? Another one that's been sort of floated around here and there is some sort of subpoena power, right? So that the CPARB committee could compel documents to be furnished to them from the police department. Some investigative communities around the country have also the power to compel officers to appear before the policing board. So these are things that have been put into place in other areas. Again, other areas have boards that are comprised of individuals that have certain qualifications and you know, have certain experience to be able to exercise these powers responsibly, right? So, you know, certainly these things have come up in my research on what other communities have done with their community policing boards, and in looking at increasing the autonomy of our board, I think they bear consideration even if we don't ultimately recommend those changes. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway from meeting with the current board was that they question their own effectiveness currently because of the limitations. So I viewed the charge that we have is how do we, or do we, consider changes to that board that would make them be more effective and thus help the community get out of CPARB what they want and help CPARB get out of their own function what they want in conjunction with law enforcement. That's how I'm viewing the charge. But as things stand right now, I mean, my takeaway from the meeting was that the effectiveness as things currently stand is not up to par.
Yeah.
So, and that was my takeaway from the meeting with the current board.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It came across clearly that the board was struggling to sort of understand their role and how to achieve the goals that were set out for them. And so regardless of whether changes happen in the charter or if there are other changes in how the town is implementing a community policing group, I think there probably are some changes that could be made that would make this board more effective, but I think it remains to be seen whether the charter is the right place for any of those changes.
Yeah. I think we'll be able to come maybe to a better conclusion on that, and with the time we're given to do it. So.
So I'll take any questions on that, but that's my brief sort of update on our progress there.
I have a quick question on this.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, this is like a really high level kind of question. Since CPARB currently is not in the charter, to make a change to something about the board, would we be recommending adding a whole section on CPARB that would define it as an entity within the charter, and part of that would include the changes, or would it be somehow just changes, do you know what I mean, to
Sure.
the resolution?
I'm not a lawyer, but I think there's two possibilities there. One is that we would recommend adding CPARB into the charter as a committee that is required to exist in this town, a board, and then we would grant them certain privileges, certain powers in that section.
Okay.
I think the alternative to that would be to grant some powers to perhaps the select board that they could then in turn grant to a board that they choose, right? So it wouldn't have to be the CPARB board, it could be any board, but in the context of the charge that we have, I think the idea is that those additional powers for the select board would be placed there with the thought that they would benefit CPARB.
Understood. Right. Okay, that helps me think about that. All right, thanks.
Yeah, I'd look at it as like a subcategory, like any other in our actual charter is right now, whether it's overseen by the town manager or the select board. That's where CPARB falls in, and then whether that's increasing select board powers or oversight or management structure, however that needs to be done, if it's through the charter.
I'm curious to know how your meeting will go with the police.
Me too.
Great.
Likewise.
Great. How about miscellaneous?
So we met and we talked through our formal responses to comments, and that's going to be later on the agenda, so I'll just hold off on that.
I think there's a typo on that. No,
Very good. All right, anything else for committee reports? Great. All right, we will move on to our fourth agenda item, action on public comments. We have 4 comments that we identified for a vote on today. I think we have draft language on 3 of them. The 4th one maybe we can put together briefly here, unless Properties surprises me and has draft language on local option tax. So let's start with actually the ones that we have draft language on. Those are the 3 public comments that were formed out to the miscellaneous subcommittee from Kim Lakakis. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly. I'll read the comment again and then the draft response, and then we can talk about any changes that would be wanted to that. Comment from Kim Lakakis. In the spirit of 2009 Vermont Code Title 10, Chapter 24, Outdoor Lighting, I would like the town of Bennington to express its appreciation of and desire for the unfettered enjoyment by its citizens of the beauty of the natural, dark Vermont nighttime sky by forbidding the use of high-powered lighting, that is undirected, unlouvered, and carelessly directed to intrude on neighboring properties. The draft response is the committee recommends this request be directed to the select board for consideration as an ordinance. Discussion on this response.
I have, 2 comments.
Yes.
One, I think it'd be nice if we said thank you for your comment first.
Okay.
And second, I mean, I was the one initially at the beginning of this process to set, to raise the importance of going through all of them. I do worry how much time, especially if we get lots more comments before and after each of our public, media covered events, that just in the sake of time, that discussion like this on each of them is a lot. So maybe we can proceed, but maybe brainstorm also other ways that are more. I wouldn't mind even delegating and trusting the responses of all of the different comments to the subcommittee personally, especially because hopefully the comments aren't going to be like they're not going to be like long paragraphs or like the whole very substantive. I think it'll be less than that. So anyway.
Hurt. I think we did discuss in sort of the admin group that we do want to say thank you.
Absolutely.
So I'm in favor of adding that in. And then we did also discuss the potential of additional comments coming up sort of beyond the scope of what we're able to effectively address in the time that we have. And so in the admin committee, we sort of thought that if something does come in too late for us to fairly consider, we should just say that and leave in our report like our committee didn't have time to investigate this option thoroughly. We suggest that this be a topic for consideration by the next charter review committee.
Jackie, I thought that, the way I envisioned it is that we would have all the public comments and the responses, but on the cover of it, we would thank all the people, the public that submitted. We would have some verbiage.
I think that's fair.
At the beginning
that's how
of
I
it.
thought of it too. Was at the beginning of the section within the final report that is public comments, that we could have an intro paragraph that's like thanking the public for all of their comments, and then that would be listed instead of thanking each individual.
If that's something we want to vote on, I'm fine with that.
Whatever.
To your point about allowing the subcommittees to, I think you said, make the decision on the response here. I want to be careful again about looking at the subcommittees as actually being deliberative bodies. I don't think that that's appropriate. I would hear opinions otherwise, but the subcommittees, I think we've asked them to sort of draft the responses, but I do think it's important that us as a full committee has the final say in approval. Potentially, we could consider approving them sort of in bulk, But, you know, I think for a lot of these, that they'll go quickly enough that, you know, we can just vote.
Sure, let's do it, yeah.
Yeah?
No, but, and I totally agree about they are research bodies, not to totally agree
Great.
with that, yeah.
Any more discussion on this response? Great. Do I hear a motion to adopt this response in the final report?
So moved.
Great. Second, Mike? Great. All in favor of adopting this response in the final report?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Wonderful. Wonderful. Next comment, Doris Hawhurst. With the advent of storefront churches popping up in Bennington, it would be advantageous to add to the charter that Bennington schools have to provide a secular education in accordance with the Constitution of the United States. Drafted response. The committee feels it is redundant to include this language in the town charter since it is already covered under federal law. Discussion on this response.
Motion to accept.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Great. The response is accepted. Comment by Aaron Sullivan. Lower the water bill or removing it, considering back in 2005 I was looking to add a room on a house and was told there was a $600 cost because we could see the end of the water source. Yet the town sells water for a fraction of a penny per gallon to out-of-state water companies, currently forcing people on town water due to the PFOA, and if the people choose not to, they will need to pay for it later. And the water bill keeps going up even when there are so many people are being billed for it. Draft response. The committee does not feel that this request is best handled with a charter revision since the select board already has the power to set water rates. We will pass this comment on to them for consideration. Discussion on this response.
Motion to accept.
I have some discussion.
No, you got it. Okay.
I think it would be valuable to actually include the place in the charter that already grants the select board authority to set water rates.
That's fair.
Yes, sir. Right here. Yep. So chapter 7. Yep. Okay.
We will have that language amended. And we'll revisit this next week, I think, with the updated language. So I have a motion.
I have a question. Stu and Dan, do you have any comments about this comment? Like, I don't even know, like, is it true that the town sells water to out-of-state companies?
That's true.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. If you're drinking bottled water sold by Price Chopper, it includes waters of Morgan Spring, Bennington, Vermont.
And is that a private spring?
No,
Public
Morgan
Yeah.
Spring is a secondary source of our water system. Comes to the surface at about 2.1 million gallons a day. Bowles Brook, which is our primary source, it's a mountain stream, about 4.1 million gallons a day.
That's a lot of water.
We have a lot of water.
Good for us. Okay, I don't know, yeah. Cool.
And by selling
No
the
idea.
water, even though we sell the water at a lower rate, we're simply selling the water. We're
not
not
treating
bottling
it.
we're not transporting it, we're
Okay.
not doing. So, and we're generating just over 120,000 a year in revenue by water sales, which does reduce water rates for our customers.
Okay, that's helpful background.
Just out of curiosity, if we did not sell the water and instead treated it and kept it for ourselves, would that increase or decrease the water bill?
It would increase the water bill because Morgan Spring is capped. It's a capped spring, but it's a true aquifer. It comes to the surface and flows. If we don't use it, it flows down the stream that runs underneath Safford Street underneath the Energizer building. They used to use it for non-contact cooling water, and ultimately exits by the Bank of Bennington into the Willemsack. There's no way to save it
Got it.
if you don't
Yeah,
use
it's
it.
artesian well, just comes up,
Mm.
bubbling from the ground.
And the select board does have the power to set water rates.
Yes, they did.
That's good.
Okay,
Can we make it sparkling?
Combination.
cool.
All right.
Interesting stuff.
Do I hear a motion to table this until next week? No? No?
I'm fine with passing it.
Yeah.
I was
I
just
mean, could we
curious.
pass
I
it
just
with-
don't know
with-
anything about.
The modifications or?
Uh,
I don't.
Sure, if we think so. I generally would see the language, but trust the committee to handle that if
I
others
think the
do.
response looks
Okay.
good.
Yeah,
Okay.
just approve as amended.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could still show it next week.
Yeah, yeah, great. All right, do I hear a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
Great,
One second.
great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Great.
Who seconded that motion?
Me.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
There we go.
The other public comment up for discussion today was from the property subcommittee, the local option tax. Considered the addition of subparagraph 5, a 1% tax on short-term rental fees from James Byers. Did the properties committee draft language on this?
Did not draft language. We discussed it, and I'm willing to put forward language right now.
Yeah.
It has been addressed in the charter, and so it would be redundant to address it again.
Okay, so maybe we could just mirror the same language, right?
Yes.
That, you know, this is already handled in the charter, here's the provision.
Please.
As such, we
Yeah.
recommend the changes.
I would be fine with that. That's okay.
Okay,
So,
great. Motion? To adopt that language?
Yeah.
Second? Great. All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Very, very good. Missed a second.
That was me.
Drew.
Thank you for
Any abstentions? Great, we will adopt that language for James Wyer's comment. Great,
About
that's what we
About
have.
time we shut him up.
Dear Jim. Thanks, Jim.
All right, so that was all I had on public comment actions. Any other discussion on this agenda item? Okay. Upcoming agendas, is there, I think the experience today of actually starting to dig into some of these topics, maybe we'll choose one charge to discuss in depth next week. We talked about properties and voting this week. The other two that remain are the CPARB charge and governance. Governance sort of has a slate of things, so maybe we could talk about a few of those, or we could talk about CPARB. Folks have a sense of what they're prepared to discuss?
I mean, I know we'll be in a good place with after our meeting next week
The chief.
with the chief. Governance. It's up to.
Good, yeah, governance is going to be a little tricky because we're meeting with Stu Thursday.
Mhm.
I don't know if we'll have enough time to discuss how we feel about certain things after that for Friday meeting.
All
That's
right.
fair.
All right, so let's really dig into CPARB a little more next week. Great. Anything else for an upcoming agenda?
Would there be some type of, what's the word, debriefing after we meet with the select board Monday? If something comes up at that meeting?
What do you mean if something comes up?
That select, like, if, after your report out on what the activities of the committee, if the select board comes up with something that we didn't discuss, or a different aspect of something, just some type of debrief, that's all. We don't have to, I mean, it's just a suggestion.
Sure. I mean, we do have to be careful, mindful of open meeting law, right? We can't have a full group discussion until our next warned meeting on next Friday.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, he's saying for
I'm talking about the agenda.
Yeah.
for next
Agenda
Friday.
item,
Yeah.
reaction by select board.
Yeah, so we can add
Yeah, I
that.
didn't,
Yeah, for sure.
No.
Can we just
I wasn't
go
going there.
over the what our end of that select committee is going to look like? You're going to speak.
I was planning
Both
to.
of you are
yes.
going to speak on behalf of the whole committee, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, so we can just be there for moral support and that.
Yeah, I think it'd be good if perhaps we all sort of gathered around the microphone. That seems sort of customary, or sort of in that area. Stand together as a committee, I mean. But again, mindful of open meeting law, don't have discussions in the parking lot, whatever, right? I do plan to speak. I am generally just going to give them some information about our process so far. I'd like to give them some information about sort of how many stakeholders we've talked to, a general idea of who they are, maybe some on charges that are being considered, and where you know, some of the generative discussions that we've had on those topics. I intend to share a little with the select board about the time frame that we've been working with. That 4 months seems pretty tight. The charges were, let's say, a little vague, maybe, or not vague, but open-ended, right? And so there's a lot of sort of learning that's going into these topics. Just some information that we've split up into groups for research, but that we're making all decisions as one body, etc., that kind of thing.
That all sounds great. I would also try to impress upon people how much we are inviting comments, how much outreach we've done, obviously in the form of these meetings, plus more, and
I mentioned the
how
public forums.
Yeah, the public forums, and how again every single comment is getting addressed on more than one occasion, without exception, and I think that people will be happy, glad to reassured to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're not just like, you know, sweeping it or, you know, ignoring it. It's on the record.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that thought from the beginning. So I think it's really great. As was mentioned earlier, we had reached out to Jonah, and we're having those little business cards printed up. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they might be available by the time we attend the select board. I'd love to be able to hand those out, but we'll see if that can happen quickly enough or not.
If I was to make some sort of visually appealing advert for this group for our public meetings, is that something that I can send and be screened, or does it have to come from Jonah?
I think you could make one. Jonah has put together some material, so maybe if you want to work with him too on, I think he can get them printed.
Contact Jonah and you know, if you've got something that you put together, I think he can use it.
Okay.
Yeah, he enjoys collaborating with other people, so he really welcome any input.
Yeah, I would do it soon. Just because.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it is.
Well, no, he's already working on some
Yeah,
stuff.
I just
so.
wouldn't want there to be two different things that look like there's two different meetings going on, so it's not confusing for the public. So if one flyer looks like this and one looks like that, people might not think it's the same.
Oh, it's not a flyer. It would be like a 3D thing you can put on social media, like a
Oh, I see.
like
That's
a
cool.
video.
Oh, cool. That's very cool. All right.
I would love to see that.
That's
too.
how bored I am.
There you go. God bless you.
You have to
Other
wear special
topic.
glasses?
Other topics for an upcoming agenda. All right, great. Any other business? How about a motion to close?
I move to close.
I'll second that.
Great. All in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Great, we will stand adjourned at 4:35.